Hear how you can boost learning and engagement in your presentations and your programs with my guest, Manja Horner, on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. I don't know about you, but I think a lot about audience engagement and client engagements, whether I'm presenting in person or virtually, or when we're running our programs and our courses, because of course, we want to make sure that our audiences and our clients are getting the most value, are learning from the material that we're providing and taking action on it, actually implementing it. So my guest today, Manja Horner, is such a wealth of information. She has an extensive background as a learning experience designer and as an instructional designer for adults. She has a background in corporate and now has taken all of her expertise and her knowledge and her experience and helps entrepreneurs like us create really impactful and transformational programs, courses, and workshops. So what Manja and I talk about in this conversation applies not only to the programs and the courses that you're running within your business, but also applies to the presentations that you're doing, whether you're doing in-person workshops, conference breakout sessions, you're speaking to business groups, and this applies both to in-person and also online presentations. So you're going to be able to take some of the ideas that we talk about today and hopefully implement them yourself. So we talk about the importance of experiential learning. And I found this part particularly helpful about making sure that we're assessing our clients or assessing our audiences in the beginning before they start the program or the course or the presentation, but even throughout the program and the course. So we talk about that. Manja shares some ideas that we can use for audience engagement, particularly for the speaking engagements that we're doing. This episode today is a nice continuation from the series that we've been doing all around in-person speaking. You can go back in your podcast app and you can see a couple weeks ago, we talked about audience engagement strategies specifically for in-person speaking. And then the episode before that was about how to get selected as a speaker by event organizers. So if you're definitely getting back into in-person speaking, whether it's presentations, conferences, workshops, you'll definitely want to check out those episodes as well as this conversation here today. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the podcast, Manja.
Thank you so much for having me, Carol. It's an honor to be here on your show.
Well, I'm excited to dig in about instructional learning and instructional design because as entrepreneurs, so many of us run courses, we run programs, we run masterminds, and we think a lot about how to sell and to market our programs. And of course, we want to deliver great customer service and we want our clients to do well in our programs, but most of us don't have a background in education or in instructional design. And so we'll put together the curriculum and we'll say, okay, we'll do office hours and you'll hear some training videos and it can be very effective, but yet we know that there's probably more that we can do so that the clients actually get what they need to get out of whatever it is that we're teaching them. So Manja, before we dig into some of the details there, I know that you have a background specifically in instructional design and you were a violinist, but and a violin teacher. So where did your interest in instructional design come from? Did it come from being a violin student and then a teacher?
Yeah, thank you so much for that summary. You really nailed it there. And so I started out as a violin teacher. This was in my teen years. And it wasn't until I had been teaching, 40 students every week on a regular basis, I thought I should maybe get skilled in this. I should formalize this. I had a business degree and I went years later to get an education degree as well, because learning is so deeply embedded into my core values as a person. And I wanted to be able to make sure that I was giving the best learning experience for my students. I thought I might want to be a teacher, a high school teacher, but very quickly I decided that wasn't where my passion lied. And I ended up in corporate training. So I had quite a great, interesting role with a big bank here in Canada. And I got to create conference learning and coaching programs, executive training. It was just such a great broad exposure that I had to creating learning. So that's really where things started snowballing. And now I just love helping entrepreneurs create learning experiences that get great results for their students.
And Manja, let's just start right here. Where do you see trainings go wrong, whether they're courses or live programs? Maybe you can distinguish. I'm sure there's some differences between instructional design for, on-demand DIY course trainings versus live programs where you're doing weekly Zoom calls with a group of your clients.
Yeah, there are commonalities in things that go wrong across all types of learning experiences. And typically it's something that's not relevant for adults. There's 6 core adult learning principles that I always try to embed. And I'm going off the cuff here, so I won't name them all, but some of the most important are, is it relevant? Is this relevant to that learner right where they are now? And are you putting in experiences that are practical, that feel real life? Because an adult doesn't need hypothetical fantasy. They need something that they can go, oh yeah, that's me right here and now. This is useful for me and I can do something with it. Because there is a forgetting curve. If we learn something and we don't apply it within hours, we will forget. It won't stick and it won't retain. So that's why I always say, no matter what kind of learning experience you're creating, what kind of delivery format, whether it be an on-demand DIY course, a workshop, or even a webinar where you're training, or a live event, make sure that you get people doing something. You need to encourage experiential learning. You need to encourage application and action as soon as possible. I think where we go wrong as an industry is we spend a lot of time telling, a lot of time dumping knowledge on people and sharing all of that pent up expertise that we have. But the more you can infuse, and even in your speaking engagements, the more you can infuse questions and self-reflection and stories that get people to embody whatever you're speaking about, people are going to learn from that.
Manja, I am so glad that you mentioned this. And it's so true that what we're talking about here applies to speaking engagements, whether it's a formal workshop training that's going on, or even just a presentation at a conference or at a business event. I'm such a big proponent of audience engagement, whether it's show of hands questions, answer in the chat questions, write something down, turn to your partner and answer a question for a few minutes, because to your point, it's the application of what they're learning is really what cements the learning. And I think as speakers, we feel like our value comes from telling people, providing the information. And I have a feeling, Manja, based on your background in instructional design, that that's not necessarily the case, at least not 100% of it.
It's so true. We tend to pack our content, our programs with too much. And we do that because we think that quantity equals value. That's not necessarily the case for people. And when I provide a program audit for a business owner, or if I do coaching on people's particular products, a lot of times I'm looking for places where we can trim content down. I like to imagine that if we've qualified people coming into our program or course well enough, they have the existing knowledge that they need. And we don't have to always give so much of the backstory, because we can lose people if we do too much of that, backfilling, I like to say. So the more you can qualify people coming in, sure, you might have to give some backstory or some pre-reading to get people prepared to come in. But then once they're in your course, just get them doing stuff immediately.
Manja, you mentioned about doing an audit for your clients. So can you describe what that looks like? What are you looking for when you do an audit of someone's course or program?
So what I'm looking for in an audit are some small tweaks that make big impact. I don't know, Carol, if you have experience making a course, but you certainly have created learning experiences of some kind, right? Presentations. Once you've made that thing, it takes so much energy out of you. You pour your heart and soul, you spend a lot of money, you hire people to help you make it, editing and building and design and graphics. To have to scrap that thing and start again is painful. So let's look for some places where you can infuse more activities for people and maybe even pull out some video. Let's infuse it with some assessments so people can track and measure their progress along the way. This is fabulous for marketing content as well. The more you can figure out assessment for people and show results, the better. I also am looking for places where we can just make the content more surprising or exciting. So popping in some little Easter eggs, some little hidden stuff along the way that people can unlock. So yeah, without overhauling completely your program, unless it's really off the mark and it's not working and you know there's something fundamentally wrong, we're looking for small tweaks to have big impact. And sometimes that's all it takes.
Manja, you mentioned assessments. So our assessments and milestones, as the course creator, the program creator, how do we think about what would make sense for an assessment and a milestone?
Great question. And based on instructional design, more of a formal sense, once you've identified what the outcomes are that you want for people, so once you figured out what's that change that somebody needs to have, you should be able to map out a couple. So I mean 3 to 5 formally known as learning objectives. So this is basically an action word. I want somebody to recall certain information and have a discussion. That's 2 things. Or I want somebody to be able to make a plan for themselves based on such and such a method. So that would be an example of a learning objective. The reason why you want it to be action verb oriented is that you can actually measure it. So you can see it happen, you can observe it in action, or you can test whether somebody is doing that thing. So if you have a little bit of structure to go, okay, I have these learning outcomes, I can now plan, how do I want to check? If I'm a coach, do I have some sort of a checklist that I have at each of these stages that I can go through and say, yes, I'm observing that my coachee has accomplished all of these things? Or can I observe that they have completed a certain number of modules and maybe done a little assessment, a little quiz? So you should always be basing your assessment on whatever learning objective you had, whatever the goal was for that particular segment.
If you are starting from scratch, say creating a course or a live program, what's the first few things that we should do?
This is a little bit maybe unconventional, but it is validate. You should never assume that you know what's wrong with people. You should always test it out and do some market research first. But if in particular, the thing you're creating has a learning component, you should ask some additional questions, not only marketing focused, but also focused on the learner and what it is they need as part of this journey. So first check, what do people want to be able to achieve? And then start to find out, do they have the skill set? Do they have the mindset? Where's their confidence at? Do they know what needs to be done? So you want to find out through some of this market research a little bit more specific details to do with the learner. And this is going to help you out big time, because sometimes we're taught by other big course gurus that you just make a course based on some result you've experienced for yourself. Like, I've made it here, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to teach everybody what I did to get here. That's okay, but it doesn't really allow people to think for themselves and come up with something creative. They have to follow your journey step by step. And sometimes they're missing that skill development that's required. You come to the table with your own set of skills and background that caused you to be successful. And if somebody else doesn't have that, they're going to be lacking a lot of the skills that are needed to actually get to where you're at. So you can be like, well, it worked for me. And then your students are like, it's not working for me. And then there's all this conflict on both sides. And this is where people drop off, lose engagement, and say, this course didn't work, and they move on.
Yeah, I love that point. And I'm thinking about, for the courses that we have a few kind of on-demand DIY courses that we primarily provide to our clients. They're for sale on the website, but we don't do heavy promotion around them, just because we promote our Thought Leader Academy primarily in our VIP days. And yet I know that we have a LinkedIn for Speakers masterclass, which our lead speaking coach, Diane Diaz, she created that course and she literally has her LinkedIn profile up on the screen. She's doing a screen recording and she's walking through how to optimize your profile. And that people love that course. It's very action oriented. You follow along, you do it while she's doing it. And we have another course on personal branding, which tends to be not theoretical, but does have a little bit more kind of like the motivation and the why to have a personal brand and put yourself out there. And that one we haven't had as many students go through because it's relatively newer, whereas the LinkedIn course has been around for 2 years. Are there certain types of topics that lend themselves better to a DIY course versus a live group program where you have that face-to-face time?
Okay, so if you have a method or a model that stands on its own without you having to handhold or provide feedback, it will lend itself better to a self-paced course. Something that you can get people to really take a lot of action themselves through step 1, step 2, step 3. That can be really useful. Something where you are breaking it down into like a really specific outcome. I would say for a DIY course, you want to keep the number of outcomes to a minimum. People like courses that they can kind of binge through and be done. Even if you offer it as like level 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the same topic, I think it's useful to keep your DIY or your self-paced courses really small and doable. So don't do some big, massive flagship program that takes somebody 4 months to do and expect them to do it on their own. Make it a weekend course.
That is such a great point. I love that you mentioned that, to keep it kind of bite-sized. And you can have multiple courses that cover like one specific area that you want to do.
Right. And you'll get a lot less buyer's remorse too, because, people have great aspirations, but they don't often get through them. And I don't know if you offer money back guarantees on your courses, but a lot of people do. If you're not satisfied with this, get your money back. And I'm kind of curious to learn more from people what that percentage is, because I imagine it can get a little bit high once people get into it and they go, holy cow, there's 100 lessons in this. That's too much. I don't have that kind of time to commit. And then they either get their refund back or they have terrible buyer's remorse. So keep it bingeable and keep it short, especially when it's self-paced like that, and just offer more in a series.
And any rule of thumb for how long each video should be as far as how many minutes?
My goal is always under 10. I try to aim for 5 or less, and only do a video if you absolutely need it. Okay. People don't need to be sitting there watching you speak for 15 minutes if they would get more action or get better results by taking an action in those 10 minutes. Actually, that's one recent document I made for people. If you want, we can attach it for people to download, but it's 10 activities that your students can do in under 10 minutes. So if you want to get them doing something, instead of giving a video, pop in one of these activities and get people doing something, taking action, because that's what gets results. It's generating new habits and taking action towards something.
And these activities, can they also apply to speaking engagements? And let's focus on in-person. Let's imagine we're back to, in-person speaking engagements, whether again, they're conference breakout sessions, business presentations, workshops, and things like that. What are some activities that you have seen work really well?
Okay, you're putting me on the spot here, but I would suggest things that require some sort of introspection. So ask a question and have people truly take a couple of minutes to write it down. Sometimes like a mindfulness activity, or like if you're doing an attention management conversation or something about grounding or presencing. Okay, so get people to actually do that in the minute. Everyone in the room, close your eyes. Okay, we're going to go through this thing, this visualization. It's one kind of an example. Have people reflect or write something down or take notes. Or if you've got a model up on the screen and they need to fill something out, get them to do that right in the minute. I love the idea of a small group in your area, talk to your neighbor, form a group of 4 around you. Yeah, thinking, just getting people to embody that and thinking about how whatever you're talking about applies to them. That would be my off the cuff suggestion.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And I remember back in the in-person days, I would usually, if I was doing, say, a conference session, I would have a worksheet probably just a one-page worksheet for the attendees, and I would pass that out ahead of time, and it would have, say, some prompts on it or some things that we would be covering during the session. And then, bonus for all of you out there, I would staple to the back of it a feedback form.
Yes.
And this feedback form is also for lead generation. So the person would put their name and email, and then have a little bit of like, what did you get the most out of this presentation today? Great for testimonials to put on your website. And then on the bottom would be check boxes where the person could check off, I'm interested in learning more about your Thought Leader Academy. I'm interested in learning more about working on my signature talk, whatever makes sense for you. Please add me to your email list, etc. And then I would have a volunteer go and collect those feedback forms at the end of the presentation. And it generates not only the testimonials and it makes you feel good, but it also generates fantastic leads. And I've had clients do this again back before COVID, and they would literally end up with stacks of these feedback forms after their presentations.
That's great. And there's so much of that we can take into our virtual events as well, because there's so many great apps and people can, contribute with polls, or there's a great app called Gather Round. If you're doing a small facilitated class, you can bring people up onto the virtual stage. You can get them into breakout rooms, answering questions or having discussions on these cards that you load up. There's so many opportunities to create interesting virtual activities and events. We could have a whole separate session just on that, but getting people to reflect, think, form a story, or embody something that makes them really go, yeah, okay, I can understand this. That's great for a conference. And then if you want skill development, let's say you're doing something that requires a communication skill, get them to try something, whether that be with this person beside them or around them, however the format is. And you can even do this virtually. So just get people trying stuff. It's going to keep them way more engaged because people are tired of the lecture format.
Oh, absolutely. And it reminds me that the week that we're recording this, we had our third Thought Leader Academy call for the current group that's going on. So the first call, we did introductions. And so they got to know each other a little bit. And then the next call, we did a training regarding their thought leadership message. And the most recent call was around helping them identify their personal story that connects to their thought leadership idea. And so I spent about 20 minutes kind of talking through and giving some examples. And then I said, all right, let's all share an embarrassing story. That just something that happened to us. And so I shared something that had happened to me back when I was a teenager in a dance recital. And then, just that kind of that little bit of vulnerability really opened people up. And so each woman shared a kind of a funny, embarrassing story. And at the end of it, I said, don't you all feel so much more connected to each other and feel like you know each other so much better than you did an hour ago before we started? Just something simple like that. And that wasn't training content but it was skill development. And it was also helping them to connect and build trust with each other.
Absolutely. One other thing I was thinking of too, with regards to helping develop skill, because that can be hard, right? Something where people need to practice something. Try to think about what you need them to do ultimately and break it down into its parts. Music teachers are so good at doing that. And I think this is why my music background actually brings a lot of really interesting insight. You can't get somebody to play a violin all at once. There's so much going on. There's like this bow that has to go in the right direction and not wander and wobble. There's this awkward hold that you're doing with the instrument. There's the left hand that's doing this thing. And there's so much happening at once. And so we always have to isolate the skills. So let's just picture you're doing some sort of, training on, let's say a software, okay? Productivity tool. Well, I'm just using that as an example. Make sure people understand all the little components, and you give little activities to try to get them comfortable with little parts of the whole process. So you kind of have to break it down into the synthesis of the skill so that you can allow people to start using it properly. So, training is complicated. And I think the message I want to get across to the listeners right now, if you leave with nothing, it's don't be afraid to get help in this area. Most of us aren't doing our own legal or our own accounting. A lot of us aren't doing our own web development, or if we were making an app, we wouldn't be doing that. So it's okay to go and get some professional support with this work. It is important to the integrity of our product. And if we think about this course or program as a product, I think our mindset is a lot more used to the idea of getting support. We wouldn't make our own widget or, electronic or even our own clothing if we were holding inventory. We'd probably hire a manufacturer to do that. So it's okay to outsource a lot of the components of your program and to get help with making it. I think there's no shame in that, and we should normalize that.
So you mentioned about with the violin and teaching a student how to play a violin. You can't just like hand them the violin and expect them to learn, know how to play some type of music sheet. I don't even know. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Whatever, but you all know. Yeah. And so when I'm thinking about for those of us who are entrepreneurs, and again, course and program creators, we're usually creating courses and programs out of things that we are experts in, that we've been doing for a really long time. And so we probably forget what it was like when we first learned how to do whatever it was. I certainly don't remember how I first learned how to create presentations and do public speaking. And so having to walk back and think through those steps can be really challenging. So like to your point, Manja, having someone else be that sounding board, especially someone who's not an expert in your field, and say, well, hold on a second. How, let's back up. How did you get from this point to this point? Because in our minds, it's so natural to us. We can just skip over a bunch of steps.
That's so true. And this is one of the reasons why you should be doing those conversations with your end user. And it shouldn't skip over where they're currently at. I always am asking questions to figure out where are you at right now in your knowledge or your skill or your confidence. And then we look at where do you want to be, and we're trying to bridge that gap because we have come so far with our expertise. We're so far removed from being the beginner that, we can really miss the boat and make something too hard for people.
And that's one thing that I do with my speaking engagements, again, whether in person or virtual, especially if I'm not sure who is in the audience. And this is especially for conferences. People at conferences are all skill levels, all experience levels. And so they're coming into your session, and I'll do some show of hands questions at the beginning of my talk to kind of get a sense of where the majority of the audience is with, their experience or their expertise, so I can tailor my content to them.
Yeah. So you're in a sense doing an assessment at the very beginning because you're trying to, see where are people at when they're coming into the room. And I think that's great that you're doing that. And we should be doing more of that as pre-qualifiers for our programs and courses, because you can end up with people in the wrong room to a high paid mastermind or an expensive group coaching program, and you realize they're the wrong fit. And then that doesn't feel good for anybody.
Yeah, such a great point. That's why we do an application process and then a consult call for our Thought Leader Academy, because it's not that we want to turn people away. It's that we want to make sure that they are at the right place to get the most out of the program.
That's right. So your audience too, like if they are trying to figure out how to convert their own thought leadership into a course or a program, I'd say have a conversation about the strategy behind that, because we can get a little bit confused with what's being offered just by looking out into the market. And even just the business model of our course or learning could be really unique. You might just want to license your content for someone else to use. You might want to make a course or a membership or a program that involves you, or a workshop in a box, or who knows what. I mean, there's a lot of options with how to monetize your intellectual property. And it doesn't have to be what you're seeing super loud on your Instagram. It could be something different.
Yes. And thank you for saying that. And I like to create the programs that, number one, I feel like I would enjoy taking, but also that goes to my strengths. Versus say, like you said, like there may be other entrepreneurs out there that are very popular, very visible. We see them all the time. The way that they've created their courses or programs works really well for them and their audience and their community. But it may not fit well for you and the clients that you have.
Right. So you can be creative with the delivery method and make sure that it's the right fit. I actually do have a little quiz that you can take if you're curious or your listeners are curious. It's I've identified 12 capabilities that an entrepreneur should have if they want to be successful with creating some sort of a learning offer. I like to use that as a more generic term because there's lots of ways to deliver your learning. So if you're curious, we can include that link here. And there's a great action pad that comes with it after, linked to a lot of really great resources that are all free. So it's just useful if you want to check, I wonder if I have what it takes and what are the areas I might want to outsource or, get some more personal development in. If anyone is interested in checking out this quiz for themselves and seeing what their capabilities are and how they stack up, you can go to my website, boostld.com, and find it there, or grab it from my Instagram link in bio. If you want to follow me there, that would be a great place. I'm putting content out every day. I sure am doing my darndest. And my Instagram is boost_learning_experts if you want to find me there.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to include links to those in the show notes. And Manja, tell us, how do you work with your clients? Who comes to you and then how do you help them?
I find that coaching is the best way that I can support people at the moment. Almost everybody has their own unique situation. So my coaching package is usually the best way to give that one-on-one support to an entrepreneur. I also do have a mastermind that is for people with existing courses and programs who are selling well, but they just are really looking for that space to figure out how to make marginal improvements ongoing to their offer. So I have a mastermind for entrepreneurs just as a gathering place. It's very safe. We have a wonderful opportunity to learn from each other, help solve each other's hurdles and problems. So those are two fun ways, but also I have other licensing agreements. So ways that people can include my instruction of how to build a beautiful offer right into their own course or program. So that's really tailored to business coaches or sales coaches who are teaching people how to make an offer that transforms, and that's not necessarily their expertise. So you can include that right in your program and have something that's really robust for your students.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm going to have to just check that out just because I like this idea of licensing and I would love to see how that you have gone about doing that. Is that on your website?
It's not. So you have to actually contact me personally. This isn't something that's advertised to the world, but here I am talking about it. So if this piques your interest, please do reach out. It's fairly niche to be able to include this in your program. We have to make sure it's the right fit. So yeah, these are just a few ways that people work with me, but definitely the one-on-one coaching and support. I call it coaching. It's more advisory. It's like, hey, I've got this idea. I want to build it out. How do I get started? Or here's my course. I'm not sure it's working that well. Can you help me? So that's really the best way for me to support people is individually through my coaching and advisory.
Fantastic, Manja. Well, I have learned so much. Thank you for coming on to the Speaking Your Brand podcast and sharing your insights and your expertise with us. I really love the part about experiential learning and making sure that our audiences, whether we're in-person speaking or running a course or a program, are taking action and that we're assessing them and pre-qualifying them at the beginning and then along the way to make sure that they're getting the most out of what the program or the course that they're going through. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to connect more with your audience as time goes on. It's so great to be connected.
You can find the links to Manja's quiz as well as her Instagram and her LinkedIn in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at speakingyourbrand.com/248. So that's the episode number, speakingyourbrand.com/248. Until next time, thanks for listening.